What book would you highly suggest to read? Well, why don't we start from first principles, JV? Start with Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book. And good old Nick says, tell us about your farm. Well, Nick, you're just going to have to come out and see it. It's Nick Nafak. He's one of the guys that works on commercial and strategy with IO Global and one of the brightest guys I've ever met. I love reading his messages, and he has some cool people. And JP says, thank you for all your hard work. Well, JP, thank you for being a fan. Mm-hmm. Do. Are you more excited for Diablo 2 Resurrected or Diablo 4? Diablo 2 Resurrected because it's a real game. Blizzard hasn't made a real game in a long time, but I'm going to bring the old band back together. All the people I was friends with when I was 12 years old, 15 years old, and we're going to play Diablo 2. I got everything set up. I got an HP Omen that I retrofitted. I got the other supercomputer. We're ready to go. And I'll be the druid. Brother's going to be the necromancer. Got a friend who's going to be the paladin. Another friend who's going to be the barbarian. That's a party right there, yo. With my infinite free time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How are your thoughts on the COVID agenda, New World Order, all this stuff? First, I'm not a believer in the New World Order. I don't think governments are that competent to manage things at that level with that degree of secrecy. That said, I am a firm believer that politicians subscribe to the philosophy of let no crisis go to waste. Personally, from the preponderance of all the evidence, I believe that COVID is likely a pathogen that was archived at a lab in Wuhan, and one of the lab techs got infected from it, probably with a mild infection due to a lack of poor safety standards, because that lab was notorious for it. And he went for something to eat at the wet market and spread it to people there. Which is why the initial Chinese response was so secretive and closed, and it was an attempt to cover something up. And the WHO was the little lapdog of China, and they basically buried it under a rug. Then it got out of hand. It spread quickly, and governments were terrified of Spanish flu style pandemic. There's 17 years of history in China with coronavirus since the original coronavirus epidemic. And there had been a huge amount of research, gain and function research, and other things that were done in those circles. That was one of the few places in the world to study a disease like that. It's inconceivable to me that this was just a random occurrence, but it is what it is. Whether it was escaped from a lab or it is a zoonotic infection, the end result is the same. It spread like wildfire throughout the world. And for a certain group of people, the mortality rate is 1% to 5%. And for most of us, it's not. And as a consequence, because that certain group was large enough, millions of people have died. It's a real disease, and it really does a lot of harm to certain people. As many of you know, my brother's a physician, and he had to treat this firsthand in Gillette, Wyoming. And if you look at x-rays of people who contracted coronavirus from the initial infection to where they're at months later, the lungs still look the same, like a bomb went off in them. It was horrible for a lot of people. Many people listening know someone who's died or been seriously impacted as a consequence of COVID. And long COVID is a thing. And it's like the Gulf War syndrome of my generation. Now, what governments have done is, despite the fact that today, now more than a year into this, we have great treatments. We understand things like the use of ivermectin and vitamin D can certainly be beneficial. There's monoclonal antibodies. There are vaccines that are more than 90% effective and easy to distribute. In the United States, 33% of the population is vaccinated. They're pretending as if this is still November of 2019 and this is a unknown pathogen and it's novel and it could be as damaging as 10% of the population. And what they're doing is they're using that excuse to control people and make people afraid. I went to the office today. An older person walked by me. I'm vaccinated. That older person's vaccinated. He's wearing a mask. I'm walking to the office outside, and he purposely moves away from me as if I'm an infectious vector to harm him. If you're vaccinated, your chance of death is 1 in 1 million. That's with all the data we have. 77.6 million Americans, about 71 deaths post-vaccination. That's from the CDC. And the data is holding with all of this. There are breakthrough cases. There was 5,800 breakthrough cases out of the 77 million that were vaccinated, which is extraordinary. It's a very low amount and very few people get hospitalized or die. And usually there's something more to the story, like they have cancer and they've gotten it, or serious comorbidity like heart disease and other things, and they die with COVID, but it wasn't the primary cause of death. But the CDC records that nonetheless. And yes, the vaccines are holding strong against the variants. Israel's been exposed to South Africa variant, it's been exposed to the UK variant. And from the data sets we have there, they're still protective. Not perfectly protective. You might get a mild illness. But let's be clear here. If everybody was vaccinated in the world at the beginning of this pandemic, there would be no pandemic. Just that simple. Here's my problem with policy. Colorado, Wyoming. Colorado, worst thing in the world. Restaurants 50% capacity. I was at Bojo's Pizza here in Longmont. I walk on in and the restaurant's damn near empty. And they say, oh, I'm sorry, we can't have too many people because capacity. And I say, okay, well, when's the next table going to be available? About 20 minutes. And I say, okay. And I go to sit in the corner, the empty corner. There's no one there. Oh, you can't wait outside. You have to wait outside in the wind and the snow. And I'm vaccinated. That's not sensible policy. Then you go up to Cheyenne, Wyoming, not too far away. And the waitresses and waiters aren't wearing masks. Everybody's just hanging out, no social distancing. I'm sorry, you can't have a situation where there's freedom of movement between a quarantine zone and a non-quarantine zone and expect the quarantine zone to be effective. It doesn't work. Either you have a total lockdown, like an island does, like New Zealand or Taiwan, or you don't. If you can't achieve that, you need different policy. And what they're basically saying is everybody needs to be tested. Everybody's freedom of movement needs to be restricted. We need to track everybody. Everybody needs to be vaccinated, but the vaccines don't matter. And we'll never get out of it. Because here's the thing. India, Brazil, the developing world, they will not get vaccinated at a high enough level this year or next year. Variants occur. Eventually they become strains. Eventually they escape the vaccines. One person started this global pandemic. Either a lab tech or a farmer with a zoonotic infection, doesn't really matter. One person did it and it spread. One person with a mutant strain that escapes the vaccines can restart the whole thing. And if that means the clock is reset and we have to wait another year for vaccines, another year to build 1 billion vaccines and vaccinate everybody, that means this never ends, ever. It's here forever. We're stuck with it. And we're under a permanent lockdown where our freedom of movements are restricted. Vaccine passports will create a two-class citizenship. And you're basically told lie after lie after lie after lie after lie by your government. And then people are brainwashed into supporting it. They say, how dare you fight that? You're not a doctor. And then when a doctor speaks up, well, you're not a real doctor. Only the doctors who work for the government are real doctors. All other physicians don't know what they're talking about if they oppose the orthodoxy. And then you ask for reasonable goalposts. You say, okay, well, what's the vaccination rate before we get back to normal? Can't tell you. Okay. So we don't have goalposts and we're under this. And then I think it's going to create a political revolution at some point. People get so tired of it, they'll say, that's it. We're done. Either they'll just stop complying altogether, or they'll vote until they get a set of politicians that remove these lockdowns. Because the alternative is medical totalitarianism. That's where we're currently at and under. And the really sad thing is that a sensible approach could be adopted to solve this. These vaccines can be updated rapidly. That's the miracle of mRNA and these other platforms. And with good genomic surveillance, good molecular biology, good R&D, every year we can have a better vaccine than the one before. And every year they get more and more effective, and there's less and less variations of the disease that are going to be problematic for us. The mainstream people, if they contract coronavirus, now I say on average, it's not a problem for them. There are certain groups that is, and certain people in the mainstream that it is. And you can always find an example of a person who has a bad outcome. Yes, there is the 19-year-old girl who died from it. But on average, the vast majority of people who contract coronavirus in the mainstream are okay. The people who wouldn't be, make sure you have a 90% vaccination rate there. Then you reopen society. Because the other group of people, it's if they have free access to a vaccine, it's a personal decision they make. And the people who are vaccinated in the at-risk group, if they get exposed, it's a 1 in a million chance for them to die. I'm sorry, it's not a serious concern anymore for them. They don't have to behave like society's bad. And over time, you get a higher and higher natural immunity because you combine the COVID vaccine with the influenza vaccine, and we get back to work. And like every other pandemic, the Spanish flu and the others, it'll burn out over time. The other thing is every developed government should mandate with the vaccine companies a buy one get one free program, saying we will only purchase a vaccine if you donate a vaccine to the developing world. If you just look at the European Union, Canada, and the United States, that would be about 3 billion doses of free vaccines for the developing world, which is enough to cover India and the entire continent of Africa. Why? It's avarice otherwise. Why not do it? So there's just not the political will to solve it. There's a lot of incompetence. I'm sorry, you can't tell me you're trusting science when a person alone on a beach at 6 o'clock in the afternoon gets a ticket for sitting alone on the beach. But then that same person can walk down the beach to a resort in Hawaii and go into a densely packed pool with lots of tourists closely looking at each other, coughing in each other, talking to each other. But that's a permitted activity. You can't do this to people. You can't have these inconsistencies. You can't have the lies. You can't say vitamin D does nothing. I would argue that a vitamin D mandate would save more lives than a mask mandate with the evidence we have available. I'll take that bet 10 times out of 10 times, and I'll probably be right with it. But no, we don't care about it. Not only do we have to wear it, double mask, triple mask, quadruple mask. And does anybody know how to wear them correctly? They reuse them all the time. It's not fitted to their faces. What about facial hair? There's a reason why when you go through MOP training, the military, you have to shave, okay, because you need a proper seal with a mask if you expect them to work properly. I'm sorry. There's just no truth and honesty to what's happening right now and how things are working, from the inconsistencies of quarantine zones to arbitrary policies to the fact that you're trying to tell people to get vaccinated, but you provide them no incentive for it, the intellectual dishonesty to the media of sensationalizing everything. Fear porn, fear porn, fear porn, fear porn, fear porn, fear porn. Again and again and again and again and again. Vaccines work. Then why the hell are you telling us about blood clots? 1 in a million for blood clots. 1 in a million. But let's make that the story so less people get vaccinated. What are you doing? Honestly. It's like, what do you want? I don't get it. I don't understand it. What's the agenda? It's just insanity. It's all madness, absolute madness. And I'm just done with it. I'm so frustrated. I'm worn out. It's one of the reasons I bought the damn ranch in Wyoming. I'm just getting reticent to travel or to interact, and I'm just tired of the double speak. I'm tired of the just madness of all this, the harm it's done to people. There is a cost to making people fear each other. We are humans. We need physical contact. We touch each other. This is part of the human experience. Every culture, every tribe, every religious ritual involves human touch at some point in the fashion. A hug, a kiss, something. And when you create a situation where we have to view each other as threats to each other's existence, vectors of disease, and we're indoctrinating children this way in school, who really don't suffer ill consequences to this, despite all the propaganda that keeps being pushed out. You are creating a society that is messed up in the head. It's broken. It doesn't work. It doesn't fit back together. And it becomes a lot easier to control people and harm people. So I think that there isn't some guiding hand about it, but I do think that there's certain groups of politicians that are definitely taking advantage of this for social change in a direction that they want to go, and they have not once been honest with us in any sense of the word. This is a public health issue. It's not a medical problem. It's a public health issue. You solve that with a different toolbox than you solve a medical issue with a person with cancer or a patient with tuberculosis or something like that. You cease being a doctor thing. It's an epidemiological thing. It's an economic thing. It's a social thing. Public health deals with acceptable risk. We accept the risk of influenza every year as a society since I was born, and we never took any of these measures for it. Somehow that's acceptable. COVID apparently is not. No one has the courage to tell us where that spectrum is and at what point do we cross the threshold from one to the other. And this is not exactly the first pandemic mankind has dealt with. Read history. Look at the Black Death. Look at what that did. Look at how many people died in 1348. Look at how horrific a third of the population, sometimes half or more of the population of a city. Look at smallpox. Some people believe 9 out of 10 indigenous members of the United States died from smallpox over a 200-year period. A reduction from 40 to 60 million Native Americans to 4 to 6 million. That's how bad that was. Don't tell me that something that for most of us is 0.3%, untreated, no vaccine, that is morally equivalent and should require a total retooling of all society. And then I read articles on Bloomberg saying this is the new normal. I will speak out and fight against this every day until I'm deplatformed and silenced and exiled, and then I'll go to my ranch in Wyoming and be a grumpy old man. But I think you should too. And if enough of us do it, then it doesn't become the new normal and we get back to normal. And it's okay. Will people die? Yes. That's the nature of life, and that's the nature of society. And you accept that. You get in your battery-powered car. You just murdered somebody. Because where do the raw materials for that battery in your battery-powered car come from? And do you think that there's not some slave labor somewhere in that supply chain? Some child that doesn't actually get to be a child because he's working at 11 years old in a mine somewhere in Africa or in Europe, in Asia? Oh my God, you should look into that before you judge. Think about it. There are so many things, from the textiles on your shirt, the dye that goes into that. How much cancer do you think the textile business has brought to the poorest people in the world as you wear your colorful shirt, your colorful dress? Don't fucking lecture me about me not caring and having empathy and being self-centered and selfish. I want to live in a society where we have empathy for each other and care about each other, hug each other, love each other. I don't want to live in a society where I have to cover myself in PPE every fucking day and old people stay away from me, even though I'm vaccinated. I don't want to live in a society where a medical dictatorship tells me for my own good arbitrary things that make no sense at all and don't pass any standard of science. And that's the society I'm in today. I accepted it until vaccines came. Now they're here. Now a third of my country is vaccinated. And yet no one has the courage to step and say, we've vaccinated enough and we're in a position where we're okay. Herd immunity will never come because strains and variants will come from the developing world every year. So there is no goalpost of 70% or 80%. Look at Australia. They're already pre-chewing it. They said even after we vaccinate 70% of the population, we might not reopen our borders. Wake the fuck up. Think about it. Don't let people have control over your life and over you. Just don't do it. And if you let them do it enough, and they'll never give it back, ever.